So if you would like to access the webinar after this, if you want to pass it to somebody, if you want to watch it again, I'll show you how to do that. I am going to put you, we'll see how you do. If it gets a little noisy, what I'll do is put the callers on mute. For now, it seems like everybody's muting themselves, so as long as we could kind of continue to keep your phones on mute unless you have a question, that should work just fine. I want this to be as interactive as a webinar can be. I want you to ask questions. I want you to maybe give brief examples of maybe some things that you've seen as successes or lessons learned from your world. As I mentioned, it's going to be recorded. It's free. Pass it along to anyone that you feel might be interested. And with that said, just a quick introduction to myself. So my name is Jim Thompson. I started Concentric in Columbus, Indiana in 2003, February 1st. So we just celebrated our 12-year anniversary. We relocated the business from the state of Indiana to South Carolina in 2010. I physically came down here in 2008. But we're located Meeting in Wentworth, downtown Charleston, for those of you that might know the area. I'll apologize up front. I'm going to put this on mute because somebody's doing dishes or something. Okay, that's a little better. I'll apologize up front if there's a fire alarm or emergency response. For some reason, when I do a webinar, it tends to prompt emergencies downtown here, but hopefully that won't be a disruption in this case. So briefly, and I know some of you have probably been involved with past forums, but there are some slides that are always worth revisiting, just time-wise, kind of the repetition and the timeline of the changes to the standard. The initial discussion period was June 2012, and the question really is, do we want to change the standard? Do we keep it as is? Does the standard become obsolete? This is kind of a rotating process that the different technical committees within the auspice of ISO have to ask themselves every 5 years or so. So the projected release is September 2005. So you've got about a little over a 3-year cycle time between initial conversation and review and release of the final draft and international standard. So just a brief overview of the 9000 family. We're looking at basically Rev 5. We had 3 revisions in the past. As most of you would know, 2000 was a massive update, and 2008 came along, and really the adopters of 9001 kind of pushed back globally and said, we're still getting the hang of this process approach from 2000, so let's not do too much too fast. So there are very few changes in 2008. I look at that kind of like, clamping a hose, pinching off a hose, garden hose out in your lawn, and 2015 to be the year where there's a bunch of pin-up changes that have kind of been in the pipeline for 15 years. So I expect this to be a pretty big deal as far as changes. And, some industries, some companies have already adopted through their sector-specific standards some of the things that you're going to see baked into the 2015 version. So some organizations will be way ahead of others, but some that are perhaps just kind of meeting minimum requirements of the current standard, which is the 2008 version, may feel some growing pains. So the current structure is an 8-clause structure. We kind of went away from the 20 elements into 8 clauses. There's over 1 million companies that are registered globally. 1.2 million is the estimate. That's companies that are registered. So who knows how many additional organizations are out there that are not registered, but they're using 9001 as the baseline for how they manage the day-to-day business. So it's a pretty substantial reach globally of the number of organizations that get affected when there are changes. You can see here over 140 countries. So let's kind of lay that over 14,001. So 14,001, the structure is different than 9,001, which has caused a little bit of confusion, specifically for us practitioners that are trying to create just one way for a company to do things. The numbering, the structure, the requirements, some of the key terms are different. So 14,001 as well as OHSAS 18,000, you have the 17-element structure. You can see there's a big adoption factor here as well. It's not 1.2 million, but you've got 200,000 companies registered globally, and that spans 130 countries. Right now we're on Rev 2, which is the 2004 version of that environmental standard. And then the expectation is late this year, maybe even 2016, you'll see the release of ISO 14,001. And the kind of twin cousin of the 14,001, or the environmental side, is this OHSAS 18,001. Now, this standard is not an ISO standard, so that's why it's OHSAS. It's actually a British standard right now, but you can see that there's 116 countries that have adopted this standard and sought registration through a third-party auditor. You've got 55,000 plus organizations registered globally. And the structure of this standard, which is health and safety, is aligned with 14,001, which is at 17 elements. So one of the things that you'll see here that I think is going to be really cool globally, especially in terms of corporate responsibility, social responsibility, that sort of thing, is the number actually changes. So the reason why the number changes is because it becomes an ISO standard for the first time in 2015, late in the year, or early next year. So, why wouldn't it be considered ISO 18,001? Well, simply because ISO 18,001 is actually already taken. That number is taken as an ISO standard, and it has nothing to do with health and safety. So that's just a bit of a background in those three very popular standards that will now be much better aligned as we move forward and the 2015 version is released. So before I move forward, I just want to open up the floor. I've taken it off mute. If there are any questions at this point, shoot away. I'll stop about once every 10 minutes or so at key transitions. So if you don't have any questions now, you can get to those in a bit. But any questions up to this point?
Hey, Jim, I've got a quick question.
Okay.
Now that the standards are kind of all lined up and dates, do you think that now when people go to get registered, they're liable to get registered for all three standards at the same time?
Yes, I think that's inevitable. I've already seen that from a lot of organizations that are trying to come up with this one management system. I mean, that's where our company name came from, Concentric. The idea is, why recreate, why have an auditing team for the HSE side and then an auditing team for the quality side? Why have separate management reviews? Why have separate tools for objectives and targets? Typically, early on in a management system's kind of maturity, you don't see a lot of integration. You typically see the HSE person kind of managing that side and then the quality person divided. But this is certainly going to help foster that integration. So definitely a good question. I also think that you'll see savings, at least in time and travel, when it comes to registration audits or surveillance or re-registration. If you have the same registrar there auditing for compliance to all three standards, you're going to cut costs. So that should be a very interesting maturity step forward for a lot of organizations. But I think if you have the bandwidth to manage that and the technical expertise, that integration is a smart way to go. So good question. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to put it on mute and move forward. So here's an example. I kind of alluded to this on the first slide, but this is a more graphical example. This came out of Quality Digest late 2014, and it shows that that second slide in a bit more detail, where you see the draft design spec and the initial kind of the origin of where are we going to take this thing? Do we want to retire it? Do we want to move it forward? I don't imagine 9001 being retired anytime soon, but that's an option. So one of the things that you're seeing early on in the cycle is that there are, for example, you see this word comment. So there was a very interesting survey, basically, that would go out to the delegates from different countries that are a part of the technical committee. And the idea is, what do you want to see in the standard? What do you want changed? What are your pain points in terms of adopting the standard? And from that point, different drafts are sent out and voted against. And so we're over here in kind of this phase right here. The last step here is publication. Okay, there's one more final draft international standard that gets voted on, and then you'll see publication. So, really the question every 5 years or so is, do we revise, use as is, or does the standard deserve to be obsolete? So just another kind of graphical depiction of that timeline. This is kind of cool because it shows a breakdown of the kind of the spread of 9001 certificates issued. Now, this is about 4 to 5 years old, but you can see that China and Italy have the majority. I mean, China's got 25% of the certifications registered. So another thing that I think is really interesting is when we talk about 9001, we're talking about one standard. Well, ISO has the responsibility for managing 16,500 standards. So, that last slide that we looked at, that review cycle, that happens a lot, not just with 9001. You see the U.S. is down here, and I think per capita, Germany has the best rate of population industry to certifications, which really isn't a surprise to me. Germany tends to take the lead in a lot of things, engineering and quality. So just a bit of a background. There is this group called TC-176. TC-176 is responsible for basically heading up and managing the 9,000 family of documents. Within TC-176, again, TC meaning technical committee, you have these three subcommittees that are responsible for not only the 9001 standard, but also the accompanying documents like the 9000 standard, which is terms and definitions, 9004, which is a guidance document, and then there's a new document, which is the 10,000 series. So I'll talk about that in a little more detail here in a second. But back to the solicitation of feedback early on in kind of the 2012, 2013 time frame, there are 122 countries that gave their feedback. Obviously, that's a lot of voices from the customer. So out of those 12,000 plus responses, the input was rich and was used to serve as a guidance in the shape of the standard. So here's an example, just another depiction of kind of the maturity or the stair step from a new working item all the way up through the final draft international standard. So if you look at the blue box, this is the draft international standard. What's so significant about this part of the illustration is that in November 5th of last year, so almost 5 months ago, I guess you could say, we've got not only approval of the draft, but a substantial approval rate. So it was nearly 90% of all of those technical committee members that were sitting around the table saying, yes, we agree with the draft international standard. Let's move it to final draft stage. So the chances of final draft stage not being approved at a level of 75% or higher in the approval rating, the chances of that being kind of overturned is pretty slim. In terms of an ISO standard or an international standard, you've got to have greater than, or I think it's greater than or equal to 75% of the voting members saying, yes, we agree with this standard or this final draft. We now want to make that a released international standard. So that event is going to happen sometime June, July period, and then the release and publication of the international standard, barring any unforeseen issues, would come out, around September, October timeframe. One other thing to note, you often hear, TS as something that's thrown out there when talking about standards. Well, the reason for that is because TS is considered a technical specification because it didn't get 75% or more of an approval rating. It got somewhere between 66% and 74%. So that's why it's considered a technical specification as opposed to an ISO standard. Just a little useless trivia, but if you get asked that on trivia night out at the pub, there you go. Think of me when you inch forward in that contest. So on top of 9001, you have these other special interest and sector specific standards that are kind of snapped on top. So obviously aerospace, automotive, medical, the telecommunications business. If a third or a half of your standard is based on 9001, then certainly you have an interest in contributing to the makeup of that baseline standard. So these folks have been heavily involved, as well as other industries. So before I get running on NXSL, let me open it up for you guys to ask questions at this point. Any questions? All right, that means either you're eating, you're asleep, or everything's going well. So another thing, if you would like to use there's a little chat bubble second from the left. It's right by the telephone. If you're not comfortable with asking a question out loud, or you want to ask something via chat, you can use that. You can chat to everyone, or you can just chat to me. So feel free to use that as well. Okay. So to address one of the questions that I was asked earlier about the alignment, there's this document called Annex SL. Last month, someone asked me, what does SL mean? Does that mean, Mexico, or where's that from? It actually was the next serial number in line, or the alpha numeric number in line, in terms of an annex to the set of ISO standards. So it doesn't stand for anything. It's not short for anything. It's just, it's kind of like 16949. That was the next number in line. So there's some other useless quality trivia for you, but that was asked, and I promised to look into that. The purpose of this document is to basically make sure that there's alignment between management system standards. So it's really the standard for standards. That's also something that's really new. So let me move to this this next slide. So the idea here is that you've got perfect alignment in what is expected for, let's say, leadership. So leadership has the responsibility for these systems: quality, environmental, health, and safety. So if you were to, let's say, create a procedure or create some sort of document under clause or element 5, that document could more easily cover all three of these items. Same thing for improvement. Let's say corrective action. Well, there's better alignment because in clause 10 is where you're going to see improvement items, improvement requirements. You see alignment across all three of those systems. So I think this is a great move, and I'm looking forward to it. But another thing to look after is, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the standard right here. This is kind of the preface stuff. There aren't really requirements in clause 1, 2, and 3. So you'll have, instead of clauses 4 through 8, you'll have clauses 4 through 10 now. And those clauses, you can see, use different headers. So leadership, currently this section would be management responsibility. Okay. This one right here is, you'll see, that the continual versus continuous, that's dropped, thankfully, and we're just using improvement. So I'll get into a couple of other key changes as we go, but the alignment should be a benefit and help streamline management system administration. So expectations for the transition. There was some talk early on as to whether the transition period should be shorter than it had been in the past, but I'm happy to see that we're following suit with previous transition timelines. So the idea is within a 3-year transition period from the release of the standard, you should be moving up to the 2015 version. My recommendation is to talk directly with your current registrar, and I'm going to actually go as far as try to never change things on the fly, but this is so important I don't want to leave it out. Okay. Talk to your registrar, and probably more importantly, talk to your customers. That's a huge first step. So if there's something that you should get started on right away, it would be prompting this discussion with your customers, with your registrar. What is their expectation? Back in 2001, 2002 timeframe, an example where companies may have been caught off guard if they didn't talk to their customer. So Daimler Chrysler at that time came along and said, okay, you can move from QS 9000 to ISO TS 16949 over a 3-year period. So saith ISO, and so saith the automotive task force. But if you're our suppliers, in terms of a tier 1 supplier to one of our assembly plants, we're going to cut this 3-year period in half, and it's going to be 18 months. So if you didn't get started on that right away, you were in a world of hurt come 2000, 2004, 2003, 2004 timeframe. So check in with your customers, make sure that they do not have an accelerated transition plan for you. If they don't, then 2018 is going to be your deadline. Starting in 2016, you'll start to see, more assertive companies requesting a transition audit from their registrar. The idea is that you want to avoid bottlenecks. The registrars are saying this. The industry practitioners are saying this. Do not wait until Q4 2018. If you do, you're likely to have a lapse in your certification, and that's not good. So start thinking about that now. If you have an audit, which a lot of folks do, that falls in Q4, think about moving that perhaps to Q2 or Q3, because there's certainly not a balanced auditing schedule across the industry. So that might be something worth looking into. Also, something to talk to your registrar about. So highlights from the current draft. At the highest level, you've got the structure that we talked about that's changed. And then there are 3 other subsequent annexes that are in the back of the draft at this point. Annex A, Annex B, and Annex C. So Annex A is really clarification of some of the standard requirements that you'll find up in Clause 1 through 10. Annex B is the 10 quality management system, or 7 quality management system principles versus the 8 that we see now. And then I had talked about that 10,000, ISO 10,000 earlier. That's where this will be discussed. So let me move forward, and I'll address those in further detail here. So one of the changes here is this new language that's referred to as the context of your organization. And the idea there is that we need you to be and to think, more deliberately and more clear on what your organization actually is. Who is the organization? Where is their offense line? who would you consider as an interested party? What processes are managed internally versus processes that are managed externally? For example, you might have recruiters within your facility that are your employees, but you might have a fence line here, and let's say you only use a recruiting company that's actually a supplier, or you have parts suppliers that you use, or you do some sort of, calibration that's done outside and some part of calibration is done inside. So the idea is that you want to start out with, improving your management system by first defining what is your management system, who are the interested parties, what are all the components, what are all the pieces of the management system versus those that are someone else's responsibility. So that's what context of the organization in 4.1 is going to require. 4.3 is scope and applicability. So unlike what we're currently seeing, where you can exclude clause 7.3 because you don't design products, there's no reference to an allowance of exclusions in this standard. There would just be some portions of the standard, some requirements of the standard that just aren't applicable. So ideally, it's whatever it takes to meet the customer expectations. So this illustration is just meant for you to, again, show very clearly where is your property line, what processes, what responsibility lie with an outside provider versus, in this case, you, the homeowner. And funny thing is, I just paid about $600 last fall, and I had a water leak, and it was right here. And because it was 1 inch on the side of the valve that the water company owned, the water company said anything that happens on this side, we're responsible for, but anything on that side, you're responsible for. So, it's funny how it tends to be that failures are really close here, and that's because a lot of times there's breakdowns and handoffs and interactions and valves and couplings and all that sort of thing. So anyway, you need to be very, very clear on the definition of your management system, the scope and applicability, which processes belong to which party. Questions? Okay, I'm going to press on. So as indicated earlier, when we first looked at the new structure, the 1 through 10, leadership is the language used versus top management, which I like. Leadership is kind of a term that's earned versus top management's just like the guy whose butt's in that seat at the very top. So I like leadership a lot. I think that's a really good alignment with what the rest of the business world calls that level. There's not a lot changed here, but the thought is that the leadership of the organization is responsible for deploying, communicating the policies and objectives being aligned to those policies. So very similar to what we see now. The commitment of leadership is going to be even more of a challenge to demonstrate. So if you're working in an organization where you have one person that's actually the more of the management system administrator, and you're saying that person is responsible for the QMS or the EMS, you need to start disseminating that management system out to the natural process owners within your organization, because that's going to be something that's scrutinized a bit more in the future. The other idea is that you have compatibility with your business management system, and I think that this is a very interesting point and probably a nice break for some of you management systems out there. The management system representative can be more than one person. So currently with, let's say, the automotive standard, there is this person called, or a role called customer representative, and it allows for multiple people to be the representative and kind of the face of the customer. That's really kind of the approach that you're seeing here with the 2015 revision, is that you can divvy up that management responsibility role to more than one person, where currently that's a single person. So I think that's a good move as well. QMS planning, clause 6.1. So the idea here is you need to evaluate opportunities. We have this thing called risk-based thinking. So what are your opportunities in business? What are your threats or those weaknesses? You know, what if you look at a SWOT analysis chart, for those of you who've used the SWOT analysis as a very simple tool, you can kind of say, well, a threat is a negative aspect and a weakness is a negative aspect, and the strengths are positive, and the opportunities are maybe those positives that we haven't quite captured yet. You know, a big focus and a big change, a big pivot to the standard right now is going to be this right here, these two. And in the current version of the standard, we call this thing preventive action, but no one really seems to get preventive action. So I'm a big fan of the fact that we now have this strand of words. It's not called risk management or risk mitigation. It's called risk-based thinking, which is a very interesting, broad way to say that whatever you're doing, be it planning for your business or making changes to your business, you need to be thinking about risk-based targets, goals, objectives. You need to be looking at, you know, how do you manage the risk that you're capable of managing, and are you willing to deliberately live with those risks that you can't, fully manage? There's certain inherent risks to any business, and so the idea is that you come up with that type of approach to thinking about and planning, deploying, checking, and action related to risk. So preventive action is going to go away. I love that, because a lot of times I'll audit an organization and I'll see 2,000 corrective actions, and maybe okay, the audit's tomorrow. Let's hurry up and create a PAR real quick, just to check the box and say, hey, we've done something that's preventive. So this is going to be a good move. So I had a question: is it better to use SWOT instead of FMEA? I'm presuming it's better to use both. My recommendation is start slow. Start with a SWOT analysis. You don't need any fancy sheets. It's an exercise. You could just look SWOT analysis up, Google it. But, what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? What are our threats? Stick it up on a board, and for every single process you have in your facility, have the process owner get their team together and just start listing these things out. Which of those specifically threats and weaknesses should we be taking some sort of action on? And I think a SWOT analysis is a much, much easier, more fundamental tool to use. So graduate from the SWOT analysis and then move your way up to the spectrum of an FMEA, which is a failure modes and effects analysis tool. Very good question. Both are great. I would look at the SWOT as kind of a 50,000 or a 50,000 foot view of what are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats as a business, and then also maybe at the 5,000 foot level, which is in our respective processes within our business. Let's do a more micro level SWOT analysis. It's an easy tool, very simple to use, very easy to train, but just gather around quickly and see what type of risks bubble to the top of the surface. So very good question. Thanks for asking that. So let me deep dive a bit into risk and this risk-based thinking. So the thought is you want to look at risk. So let's look at this illustration here on the right. This is basically a 3D blueprint, 3D model of your home. So let's think about taking the top off of your operations and looking at your operations like you would look at your home. So what you want to do is maybe gather your family around, or your work family at work, and look at, if we know that the kitchen is the number one riskiest place, let's lay out what are all the risks in the kitchen. What can we do to minimize those risks from spreading to the rest of the house? Maybe it's fire prevention. Maybe it's a smoke detector. Hey, perfect timing. It's a fire truck goes by. And I swear that's not somebody next to me with the fancy sound effect. So the idea is evaluate those risks in a macro approach, and then go micro approach. Let's look at the bedroom. Let's look at the bathroom. Plan for those risks. What is acceptable risk? What is unacceptable risk? What is the probability of risk? And what is the severity of a particular risk? So, I look at, let's sit down with my family and map out risk A all the way through risk Z, and then let's do an analysis of how probable is it that we'll have a fire in the kitchen. Well, it's pretty probable that it happens in 1 in 15 houses. I don't know what the numbers are, but and let's first start focusing on high probability times high severity. So if it happens all the time, and you've got a 90% probability here, and then the severity is death, obviously you want to start with that risk first. If you've got A through Z, you've got 26 risks. Maybe K is the kind of the highest level, highest probability times the highest severity. That's a big darn deal. Start with that. Make your improvements. Do what you need to do to minimize the probability or remove that from happening in the first place, and just go down that list. So I had another question, and the question is, what's the difference between risk-based and an FMEA? So risk-based is more of a methodology, and FMEA is an analysis tool of all of your A through Z's, collecting all of your A through Z's and looking at the effects of those A through Z's. So I would say, your risk-based thinking is a methodology. Your FMEA is a very prescriptive tool to get down to the nitty-gritty and prioritize all of your failure modes. So you could say, whenever you hear risk, you can also look at that as a failure mode. So those two kind of act together. Is there another tool? Yes, there fault tree analysis. There are all kinds of tools related to a risk assessment. I mean, you can you can create one on your own. You can say, what's the probability of risk A happening? If your name's Ted, make it the Ted matrix. So risk A, the probability is 3%, and the severity is 14%. And you come up with some sort of indicator, and you hit the sort button, and then the one that's rising to the top is the one that you work on first. So one thing I'd like to do for the next, I'll put this down, I'm making a note of it, for the next session, or actually I need to get some examples of risk, some tools to use for risk, and put that in a blog and kind of bake that into maybe our next session next month. So examples of risk-based tools. So let me take the cheap way out and ask you, give me some tools that you guys currently use that you seem to have success with, that work well. Anybody have any input?
Hey, Jim, this is Fran, and actually right now I'm in Georgia. Honestly, my company doesn't use risk-based analysis. That's one of the reasons why I'm in the seminar. I was trying to get ideas from people. And we were looking at FMEA. Now I'm going to go back and look at SWOT analysis. But we're trying to get ideas for our company as well.
Okay. Someone else had typed a cause and effects matrix. That's good. Type in Google C&E matrix. Someone else said they use a mini FMEA. That's fine. I mean, these are tools. If your customer or your industry or this, a sector-specific standard doesn't force you to use that, come up with something that works well for you. I've also ran into people that struggle to find a tool or a gadget to work for them, or they struggle to find real numbers. How do I know if it's 3% or 14%? In that case, my recommendation is that you look at market data. Let's say you're not sure what percentage the kitchen catches on fire. Go out and do some research industry-wide. You don't have to have information specifically for your block or your building, but you can look at probability over a bigger population. Another thing you can do that's very simple is just do a survey. What is your perception within within our day-to-day business or within our house of, if we look at risk A through Z, rank them in probability and severity based on your opinion. You start there, and then you can get more scientific. Then you can put the measurement systems in place to give you real data. But the idea is you get started now, and there should be some things that you can do that would be considered low-hanging fruit. They're just things that are very simple to do to prompt that risk-based thinking. Okay, I'm going to put you on mute again and press ahead. So thanks for the comments. I appreciate that. I will take that as an action item and look at a couple more things to bake in here as far as recommended tools, and share that during the presentation next week. So here's a little Dilbert cartoon. I'll need a project plan to justify the resources we need to change our software. And that's what Dilbert's boss is saying. And Dilbert says, I can make those software changes in 10 seconds, done. And his boss says, good work. Now all we need is that plan. So, this illustration is meant to, get you to think, what things need an extreme amount of planning, what things can you just go and change? Dilbert might have made a change here that impacted someone else in another department. So the idea is that you're using risk-based thinking and making sure that you have proper controls in place when you make change. So almost like that handoff of the fence line between where the utility company owned the bursted pipe or the leak versus me as a process owner. Anytime you make a change, there is an inherent risk to doing something different, or your output from a process is changed, which then becomes a foreign input into the next process. So change management and risk management, or risk-based thinking, are two aspects of the standard that we'll really need to be focusing on, and being proactive and forward-thinking as we mature our management systems. Let's see here. Okay. I was just looking at some of the other chats. I think I've addressed all of those questions so far. So, necessary knowledge. I think this is great as well. Let's get rid of the term competency. I don't like competency. It seems to be negative. But the idea is, do you have the necessary knowledge within your system, either the people or the tools or the work instructions, in order to achieve your desired result? So one of the tips that I use, because I get asked all the time, what's the appropriate balance of documentation? And one of my tips is, where absence of documents equals a nonconformity, then put a document there, or put some other pokey yoke there, put a more advanced or knowledgeable person in that job. So this is, again, kind of like leadership. It's a lot more action-based. It's a lot more in line with business language versus competency and, that sort of thing. So I think that's a good change. I'll spend more time on that in a future session as well. So Annex A, we talked about that. It's a clarification of the new structure terms, and it gets into a little bit more guidance on what the risk-based approach is. B is your management principles. So this management principle right here kind of goes away. Improvement is here. The process approach is here. Just some minor tweaks. Instead of supplier relationships, you should be looking at a more holistic approach. Those interested parties that have some connection or impact to your business, which could be a supplier, certainly is a customer. It could be the neighborhood that's right out back from your facility. It could be a business partner, an affiliate. So that is much more broad. Continual gets dropped, and you see continuous. That debate goes away. We're just dealing with improvement. So those are your 7 management principles versus 8. That'll be in Annex B. Annex C gives you a kind of a new look at what's called the 10,001 portfolio, which means the 10,001 portfolio is the umbrella for all QMS family of standards. So anything underneath, including the 9000 series, would be under this 10,001 umbrella. And the idea is you use your quality management system to drive organizational excellence. And so that becomes another addition to the back of the standard. So next steps, we're a month to 2 to 3 months out in terms of the final draft international standard being published, or not published, but approved. And the idea is somewhere Q3, Q4 2015, we'll see the new standard. So that's kind of the stair step there. So transitioning. So the idea is you're going to start now, but maybe officially starting with some of the really heavy lifting in September or Q4 early 2016, and then being transitioned early 2018 if you can. Don't wait till September 2018. So real quick, we're about out of time. I want to show you some good resources here. I want to move over to the actual internet rather than screenshots of it. But if you go to our website, you will see it says ISO changes right here. If you click there, or you can go under here, or you can just in a search bar put 9001:2015. Either way, it'll bring you to this really rich resource page that every month we add things to. So here's the recording from February's webinar. So if you want to take this and forward it to someone else that you work with, your suppliers, whatever, you can even use the share feature and share it to social media. It doesn't cost anything. It's just, there it is. These are articles. So as we come across articles, not only me, but other subject matter experts within our organization, they'll send that to me, and we'll bake these in. Well, Ronnie, the web goddess, will bake these in, as well as key links. So the stuff that's here isn't all of ours. This is stuff that is a collection of various useful resources that are all free out in the inner beings and interweb at this particular time. We'll also continue to put dates and registration information for future forums here. So if you want to come to the next one, that's how you get to it. We come back over here. You can also subscribe if you want. I hate email, so I wouldn't subscribe if I were me. But a lot of people like emails. When we publish something that's new related to a blog or an update to this site, it would send you an email and keep you abreast of ongoing changes. These are all the other ways that you can get in touch with us. Our address is 266 Meeting. So if you're in the area, stop by, knock on the door, say hello. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or email. These are all different ways that you can get in touch with us. And if you need any other means of getting a hold of us that's not on here, I would be surprised. But those are all the ways you can get in touch with us. I'm Jim. Megan and Ronnie are here as well, here in the office, and then our subject matter experts are kind of strewn all over the U.S. But that's how you get in touch with us. So, any last-minute questions or comments? Questions, comments, ridicules?
Hey, Jim, this is Lee Pope. How are you?
Hi, Lee.
I've got a question that I need to ask you offline after this is over with. If that's okay.
Yeah, why don't you do this? Call this number in 5 minutes, 843-469-8279, and I'll take your question.
Okay.
The next webinar, good question, is hasn't been posted yet, but where are we? We're the 25th, so it should be either the 22nd or the 29th, Wednesday the 22nd or 29th at noon. We try to do these every third or fourth Wednesday of the month. So good question. If you're interested in, like I said, staying up to date on announcements such as when the next one's going to be, just go to any page on our website, put your email address. You can even make up a, funny first and last name if you want to. But when you hit subscribe, it'll put you on the mailing list for those invitations. So, any other questions? All right, I will stop recording. I'm going to leave this session actually going for a couple minutes. So if you need to ask something via chat, you can do that as well. So thanks again. We should have Ronnie will have the recording up probably within the next 24 to 48 hours. So check back if you want to look at the video at some point in the future. So thanks so much, and have a great day.